Hi and welcome. As we've seen from previous weeks, the IPCC Working Group 1 and 2 reports present factual, imminent, and longer term consequences of global warming due to human activity. The question now is, what are the various scenarios for mitigation and adaptation? Working Group 3 report provides a summary. Considerations in climate policy design include ensuring food security and equitable development for developing nations as well as richer countries within a time frame that allows ecosystems and living species to adapt to climate change. A key issue in climate mitigation in sustainable development that incorporates fair resource distribution and poverty eradication. Scenarios include certain risks and uncertainties involving value judgments held by different regional groups, states, and private entities. Cost-benefit analyses are important in the process of developing adequate and feasible adaptation strategies. Such analysis tools may deliver different results depending on incorporated factors, including equitable sustainable development. Socioeconomic factors need to be considered in climate mitigation policy since adaptation in itself could follow pathways that are not necessarily optimal or equitable across global communities. The market economy allows for certain corporations to benefit, whereas there are those who lose out or are left vulnerable under the current global system. An example is low-lying coastal nations such as the Maldives or Bangladesh that are slowly being inundated by rising sea levels. Co-benefits or win-win situations from climate mitigation policy are an alternative and include suitable refugia for species, avoiding biodiversity loss, human health, livelihoods, and environmental quality improvements. Adverse effects of climate action take on many forms and include various degrees of financial and economic decline for some industries, particularly the energy sector, that is greatly dependent on fossil fuels such as coal, oil, and gas. This will in turn see some shorter-term economic impacts to countries dependent on these energy sources. A significant conclusion of the Working Group report is that increased costs and declining viability of fossil fuel corporations will be inevitable. A 100% decarbonized society equates to zero use of carbon-intensive resources. According to scenarios with the highest emissions reduction, this will be in effect by the end of the 21st century. Consumer habits and lifestyle changes will also be important and are necessary for the reduction in energy demand as part of the mitigation scenarios with atmospheric CO2 concentrations of 450 to 500 parts per million by the end of the century. This may be accompanied with technological advancements effective in maintaining adequate economic progress. Scenarios for climate mitigation range from the upper levels that propose low carbon energy to limit warming to 2 degrees Celsius by the year 2100. Lower level scenarios are closer to the baseline that continue on with current trends predicting between 2 to 4 or upwards of 5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. We observe sector-specific mitigation contrasted to that of economy-wide mitigation. The energy supply sector is one example of cross-sector mitigation. At the baseline scenario, CO2 emissions from energy is predicted to double, if not triple, by 2050, and is the biggest contributor to emissions next to the industry and transport sectors. Renewable energy technologies are a key strategy for lessening the dependency on fossil fuel sources. Carbon capture and storage technologies are another method to reduce CO2 emissions, increasing atmospheric temperatures. There are limitations to this, including significant costs even after combining bioenergy technologies. The transport industry contribution to CO2 emissions reached 27% in 2010 and has been predicted to double by 2050. Mitigation efforts in lower carbon alternatives range depending on the vehicle type and distances, but could have significant impacts through urban redesign and redevelopment, involving many co-benefits. The building sector CO2 levels account for 32% and are predicted to increase between 50 and 150% by 2050. Industry accounts for 27%. Both sectors involve mitigation strategies that include reducing polluting or unsustainable materials used and replacing these with sustainable ones. Better building code standards and waste management practices would contribute to lowering emissions. Agriculture and forestry is predicted to contribute to decreasing CO2 emissions in coming years, and at 2010 contributed only a quarter of all human GHG emissions. Agriculture and forestry is somewhat responsible for food security and sustainable development, particularly for developing nations, although alternative food production methods are slowly superseding this widespread view. Mitigation via international collaboration and not independent actions will be a pivotal strategy in effective climate action. Self-determining, siloed approaches can add to the complexities of global climate change, exacerbating negative externalities. On the other hand, driving international cooperation has proven complex in a world of sovereign nation-states. Examples of national and regional collaboration in mitigation include the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Climate Change Convention of 2016. The success of these collaborative efforts depends largely on the ratification of signatory countries. The US withdrawal from the Paris Agreement has caused widespread alarm, given the US industry's contribution of emissions. Sustainable Development Goals came about with a view to holistically tackle dire global issues including that of social inequalities, unfair resource distribution, and struggling economic development of certain countries over others. International agendas have assisted in expanding these concepts to include natural ecosystems and environmental justice. The SDG for 2030 are geared around key longer-term strategies for a fairer, more equitable world with ongoing sustainable development. These goals commence with the more urgent priority of eradicating extreme poverty, which has improved drastically from 1.7 billion people living on less than US $2 a day to 767 million people in 2017. Food security, health, child immortality, and education have all improved to varying degrees. Access to renewable energy also increased slightly. A number of other SD goals indirectly involve mitigating climate change. Yet, the 13th goal directly mandates urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. Thanks for listening to this presentation on climate mitigation and the Sustainable Development Goals. I hope it's been interesting and see you for more discussion on